This is Waylon Lewis. I am honored to be back with one of my favorite guests of late, Ruth Schwartz, for a part two. We're talking about conscious relationships, communication in relationships, lack of communication in relationships. Today we wanted to maybe focus on a few themes that came up or that we didn't actually get to last time. Sexuality, healing and triggers around sexuality, and neuroplasticity, which is a big fancy word that Ruth will explain to me. But basically, are we stuck with who we are or who we think we are and our experience in life, or can we grow and change, or is it a bit of both? So please, if you're just tuning in, say where in the world you're from. I'm in Boulder, Colorado. And let's see, I think I can invite you, Ruth, if you prefer. I have no requests. How do I invite someone? Invite. There we go. And where in the world are you? I'm in Boulder, Colorado. Let's hear from someone. Here comes Ruth. Hey, Ruth.
Okay, here we are.
We're professionals.
Yay.
Were you able to find the join button, or was it helpful that I invited you?
I think it was helpful that you invited me.
Always trying to learn. So, you know, we have these huge subjects, at least huge to me. Maybe they're a little simpler to you, but I feel like none of us understand. All right, we got an Arizona in the house. Thank you. Ruth, where in the world are you?
I'm in California, in Oakland.
Oakland, nice. Oh, and we have a Texas. Hello. Always nice to touch in with a little community. So, last time we completely solved relationships and communication. And then this time we just wanted to talk about sexuality. And do you want to, and some other issues, but do you want to remind people what it is that you do or specialize or focus in? Who are you?
Great. Yes, I'm the director of Conscious Girlfriend Academy, which is an international resource for lesbians, queer women, all women who love women or want to. We offer classes and support and community around conscious dating and relationships and sex. And conscious is really the thing that you and I are here to talk about, because it is vast. It is vast, and it is like like a work of art, when we really bring ourselves to ourselves and then to each other in that way.
And I think on a personal level for everybody, so many of us feel like failures in relationships because we watch all these rom-coms and we're told that relationships happen because of attraction. You meet in a bookstore and then you have one or two traditional arguments, you get through them, and then you have a happy ending. But then even whether we're alone or in a relationship, the reality is very different.
Yes.
So how do we engage in that conscious, wakeful, like Buddha, I'm Buddhist, literally means awakened one, or to wake up. So conscious, how do we engage in conscious relationship around sexuality?
Yeah, such a great question. So I think romantic relationships are human relationships on steroid, and then sexual relationships are romantic relationships on steroids,
right?
Because we up the ante. We get more vulnerable, we get more stripped bare in sexuality, literally and emotionally and psychologically, at least in what many of us consider to be good sex. Some of us also have the ability to have sex that is fairly non-emotional.
Yeah,
some
I don't know
people
who
don't.
those people are, but I'm sure there's one or two of you out there. So, yeah, and they bring up so much excitement, like childlike, like excitement
Exactly.
very quickly turns into attachment or fear of attachment.
Exactly. Yeah, Sue Johnson, who's an attachment theorist, says that sex is an adult attachment activity. So, we get naked and we're having all these physical sensations, and we're, using our mouths and hands and turning off our minds. And so it is really like a baby state. It's what was programmed into us from the beginning so that we would initially bond with our parents or whoever was taking care of us. And so all of that gets activated when we're having sex. And of course, we yearn for that, because there is a part of us that is always in that state, hungering. And in most of our adult interactions, we don't get to touch into that part of ourselves very much. So there's a tremendous yearning and there's a tremendous complexity, and I think this is where people like you and me and the people that tend to come to the academy, um, our relationships are more complex because we're living in more complex ways. Like the stereotypical 1950s heterosexual marriage where the guy has this role and the woman has that role, and nobody was particularly expecting emotional intimacy or sexual intimacy. I mean, the word sexual intimacy is sometimes used just as a euphemism for just having sex.
Right.
And people aren't talking about it as, do you feel deeply connected and are your needs and fantasies being met, and do you have open communication? Like none of that was in that old role model.
Mm-hmm.
So for
Yeah, you don't
people,
talk about anything back in the day. Like it
right?
just happens and it works or it doesn't, and you don't talk about it either way.
I don't even know if in that model it was supposed to work
Right.
for, certainly not for the women. It was just, something that happened. It was very basic. So the thing is now, people like me, I'll speak for myself, but maybe you're included, like we want so much more. And that's the challenge. Because we want so much more, we also need a higher level of skill to show up and be able to co-create it and be able to deal with the triggers that come up. And Eric Fromm, who's one of my gurus, he wrote The Art of Loving. He says that there are no other endeavors that we enter into with as high hopes as we enter into as with love that fail as regularly. Um, but he also says the first step to take is to become aware that love is an art, just as living is an art. If we want to learn how to love, we must proceed in the same way we have to proceed if we want to learn any other art.
Right.
And I love that. He says a lot that, this thing called love, it's not natural. I mean, it's natural to bond, but this thing called deep emotional intimacy between one complex, wounded human being and another, and we're both dynamic and we're always growing and we're changing, and often we're at odds with ourselves. I know often I'm at odds with myself.
Right.
So how am I going to think I'm going to be not at odds with someone else?
Yeah.
With all their complexity. So that's the field that we're kind of swimming around in. And then I
But I think,
guess go ahead.
well, I think with the obvious exception of you and my friend Jason Gaddis, who has a relationship school, like historically, unlike, in terms of Eric Fromm's quote there, is totally unlike any other art or craft in that there's no school, there's no guideposts, there's some truisms and quotes and stories you can read. I think we kind of learn from stories historically, but the stories are generally simplistic, some exceptions, of course, but like, I don't know, I guess, I'm 49 now and my engagement broke up last year. And I feel like I both understand a lot about how to connect with people genuinely in the intimate context, but also like I understand nothing less than ever on some level. So how do you begin to, in this big world of confusion where you're like, oh, I'm in love with you. Oh, it's so intimate. Oh, we had an argument about dishes. What do we do now? Like, how do we proceed, I guess?
Yeah, yeah. And I so know deeply that place of shattering that you're talking
Yeah.
about, which is like, what the bleep? I don't know if it's okay to, say other than bleep on the podcast, but, it's like everything that we thought we knew and could count on falls apart. And it, in shamanic terms, that's a dismemberment. And when I was being trained shamanically, we were actually taught in shamanic journeys to ask our guides to dismember us over and over, because the idea is, yeah, I know.
Yeah.
The idea, well, part of the idea is the more we do it in journeys and non-physical reality, maybe we don't have to have it happen as much in physical reality, but also that when everything that we thought we knew gets torn apart, there is this incredible opportunity to become different, to let new information in. I mean, pain, as you know, is I argue with my guides about pain and why there's so much pain all the time. And they always say, because people learn so much from pain. Theoretically, we could learn just as much from states of non-pain, but most of us, when we get brought to our knees, that's really when we're open to, like, what do I need to change? What do I need to see that I didn't see before? Like, what do I need to do differently? And so it's a very fertile state and
Yeah.
excruciating.
Yeah, in Buddhism, you call it don't know mind, or you're actually open when you, maybe with the dismemberment, losing heart, you're losing your heart, a part of your body. You're like in Buddhism, we say losing heart, that moment when you want to give up, you've tried everything and nothing's working, is actually a gateway to, and that connects with our other question, neuroplasticity,
Yes,
to learning it a new way, a new path forward.
yes, yes. So let's talk about that. Um, on the one hand, we have our nervous system patterns, we have our neural network set up. Deep emotional change is hard.
Right.
We are creatures of habit, and our neural pathways are set up to make things simpler in this complex world. And so, of course, if there's well-worn grooves, we're going to follow them over and over and over. And if there weren't learning possible, none of us would be here. None of us would be alive
Right.
on this complex earth, and we certainly wouldn't be doing an Instagram, and a Zoom so it's like we also have brains that are capable of incredible learning. um, and we see examples of that every day. And so I often try to say, like, when you watch anybody doing something great, like a great ice skater, in the Olympics, um, what you don't see is the thousands and thousands and thousands of times they fell, you know, and limped off the ice. And so I think that we need to know that this thing called love, if we really want, the full emotion, lasting emotional intimacy with someone, we need to know there are going to be lots of those bruising experiences and make choices. I think part of what I see people do is really not choose the right partner for them. But
Yeah.
also, we often show up not as the right partner ourselves. So
Right.
that's like a catchphrase that I use. It's like, how do you really choose the right partner, knowing who you are, knowing what matters to you in your life, what you want, and including sexually, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
because like we place so much emphasis on that initial chemistry when we get all lit up. It's the most compelling experience that most human beings ever have. It's phenomenal, and it's not trustworthy in terms of compatibility.
Yeah. So, two things. One, you said, when you're looking at an Olympic, competitor, you are not seeing the thousands of times they practiced or failed. Um, that brings to mind, I just watched two great documentaries, one about tennis, which I didn't know much about or care much about until I watched this, and it totally got me into it. The story, the kind of human, that quest you're talking about, that practice and that failure and that victory, and then the Tour de France. And you see another one on the Tour de France of biking, and you see the amount of like emotional
Mm.
turmoil and focus and failure and success and wow. And then, there's this famous Nike commercial from the 80s or 90s with Michael Jordan, you know, one of the greatest basketball players of all time. Most folks consider him the greatest. And he's saying failure. Like, I've failed, I've missed 50,000 shots. I've missed 100 game-winning free throws. I missed, he's going through all his failure. And, the end of the commercial is, and therefore I succeed because I'm willing to go out there. But then you brought up, so I just wanted to bring those examples up because I completely agree with that model. There's this famous, she was actually a Republican back in the day when Republicans maybe were a little more moderate. And she was a feminist Republican who fought hard. I was just learning about her last night for equal rights and representation within the U.S. military and Congress and all this. And she had this great quote that said, "I've failed every time except for the last time," because she finally got to the point where in this one battle, she was trying to get women in the Navy to be recognized equally.
Wow.
I love that quote. I failed every time except for the last time.
Yes.
But then you brought up compatibility. I think I'm self-aware enough, I won't say that self-aware, where I realize the people who are attracted to me or the people who, it's easy to be compatible with aren't always the partnership or the compatibility that I need to be looking for. Meaning there can be mutual attraction and fun, but like really, I think honestly what I'm looking for is someone deeply sane and stable and communicative and, all that. Like a real partner, a real team player in family and in partnership. So how do we, all of us, look for conscious, awakened compatibility?
Yeah, that's such a great question. So I talk about 3 levels of compatibility, and usually people are just tracking for the first 2, and I think the third is what's most important. So the first one is like shared interests, shared hobbies, shared passions, things in common, shared cultural background, like all that stuff that makes us feel like, oh, you get me and I get you.
Right.
So that's level 1 compatibility. People know about that.
In my case, just to be specific for people, like it could be, well, not in my case, but it could be religion. It could be spirituality. In my case, I was going to say, I like to bike everywhere, eco, I like to compost, not get tons of trash and plastic, all that stuff.
Right. And level 1 compatibility is important to have a certain amount of.
Exactly.
And then level 2 compatibility is the sort of intangible, I just like being around this person, I want to touch this person makes me laugh, I feel attracted, sexually attracted to this person. So that's level 2. And so what most of us, I find, and believe me, speaking from my own personal experience, what we do over and over again is look for level 1 and level 2 compatibility, but then often the relationship doesn't work. And so it's like, well, what the fuck? What else is there?
Yeah.
And so level 3 compatibility, as I've defined it, is that you look for someone who has a similar or compatible relationship vision as yours and the skills to implement it. And of course, you also have to have the skills to implement your own relationship vision, because lots of us might want things, but it doesn't mean we're capable of them. And
we may not have done the work, or we may not even have the guidance.
Right. And so that is a matter of recognizing that there's something we really want and building capacity. Like these athletes you're talking about, like Tour de France or Michael Jordan or whatever, like, they didn't have the capacity when they started out.
Yeah.
It was like they had a dream and they built the capacity. And so if you had someone else who said, yeah, I want to be able to take, long bike rides for hundreds of miles through the countryside. It's like, okay, that's my vision, that's your vision. Okay, what do we need to develop in ourselves so that we can actually do that? And everybody knows if you're taking a long bike ride through the countryside, there are going to be moments when you don't feel like it. Like your legs are going to hurt. It's going to be too hot. It's going to be too cold. You're going to be tired. You're going to be bored. It's like, this is not what I signed up for.
The thing that comes up for people, which is analogous again to relationships. It's not always what you think it's going to be. The biggest thing that comes up is a sore butt, because you're on your butt all day long. You'd think it's the legs or the weather or whatever, but if you can't sit on your butt without pain, the whole thing goes to hell. And I think in relationships, it's always the one thing, you know, you prepared for the legs, you prepared for the rain, you prepared your tent, your snack,
Yes.
your flat tire, but then you can't even sit on your own butt without pain. So in
Wow. I
relationships, it's
love
like,
that metaphor.
yeah,
I love it.
like in my last engagement, we loved each other. We had wonderful values in common. I would never speak ill of her, but we mutually couldn't figure out communication. I think we touched on that last time, you
Yes.
know, and that's on both of us, certainly on me. And I'm like a communicator professionally. You
Mhm.
know, I love to communicate. I love to listen. I love to talk. I love to learn. And yet I kind of sucked at it with the person I loved most, you know? And I think that's
Mhm.
sort of like the butt in a long bike ride. You're like, oh, I never thought communication could be the issue.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so this is where, you know, the knowledge you have now about long bike rides, like what really gets to you is the sore butt. You know, that is the kind of conversation I really want people to be able to have and teach people, help people practice being able to have while we're dating. And ideally before we're dating, because once we're dating, all this stuff starts happening in our brains and our bodies, and we're like, I can just tell it's going to work out because it feels so right. You probably know this, Waylon. That's a brain drug state called limerence.
Mm.
Um, so our brains literally start producing these chemical cocktails designed to get us to bond.